And we have our first guest we're bringing on. So, our first guest is Joshunda Sanders. And this is a very interesting subject because she has a book called Women of the Post. And I wanted to ask her some questions about it. Seems like this topic has become a topic of interest in recent years. And I wanted to know if she had any ideas why. So, anyway, Joshunda, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV. And we apologize, we had a little technical difficulty at the very beginning.
Oh, no, that's all right. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
And thank you for being here.
And do you have a copy of your book, Women of the Post?
Not next to me, no. Do you have
Okay.
it? 'Cause I can go get it.
Okay.
We want to see the cover. Is it close to you?
It's close to me. I'll go get it. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, because we would like to see the cover. And let me see. I'm trying to see.
That was quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I told you it was close.
It was. Okay, Women of the Post. And
that's an interesting cover. It looks like is it kind of juxtaposed onto something else? Your virtual background is playing with it. Oh, that's much better.
Yeah. Is this
no, it's not. It's set in a male, like in a hangar, like an airplane hangar, and so you can see where I think this backdrop is supposed to be the 17 million plus pieces of mail that the 855 Black women of the Postal Battalion helped to clear for the troops who marched on Normandy.
Right. And this is a topic, and I'm sure you're familiar with Sisters in Arms by Kaya Alderson that came out. I think it's Kai. I think it's such pronounces her name. That came out, I guess maybe a year and a half ago or a couple of years ago. And now Tyler Perry has a Netflix movie about the topic that's going to be, I'm not sure of the release date, it's supposed to be this year, called the 6888, which is also about the Postal Battalion. So I wondered, it's like all of a sudden we're hearing about this from World War II. Maybe it was being talked about some other time and I just didn't hear about it. But I consider myself to be a student of history, and I pay close attention to things.
We're starting to hear more about the women who contributed to World War II, but I think this is the first time I've seen a study on the Black women who participated in World War II and who set the basically, as you said, set the stage for the Battle of Normandy. So I'm very interested in that topic myself. Being a Black female veteran myself, this is something that's very close to my heart.
What branch did you serve in?
I was in the U.S. Army for 23 years.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for your service. That's incredible. I love to say that specifically to Black women veterans, because I feel like no one says that to them. That's what I have heard. But I can say that I did not think that I would be writing about World War II because I have not traditionally been interested in historical fiction. So my interest in the battalion really came about because I have written a novel that was, I lived in Texas for many years, and I have written a novel that featured this woman who woke me up out of my sleep. I had like a family illness going on. And my mom had terminal cervical cancer. And so I was awake at like 3 a.m. and I had this vision of this woman in men's clothing sitting at a kitchen table, and she was going to go somewhere. And this was maybe back in 2011. And so I had no idea what she was doing or what she was trying to tell me or what her situation was, but that was, I think, and I've heard that other writers have similar situations where they're just a character is inspired by a dream or some vision that they have, or, you know, it's like a visitation. And so I tried to follow that novel where it went, but it didn't really go in the direction that I expected it to. And I just had family events take over my life. And so I put that novel away. And when at the beginning of 2017, as Trump took his presidency and as I went to Hedgebrook, which is a women's writers residency on the West Coast, and finally I had some respite. I was able to like breathe and think and write. And so I was doing that. And I had that novel in the back of my mind and that woman and where she was going. And then I happened to read an obituary for a woman named Alice Dixon. And Alice Dixon was 106. She had served in the Women's Army Corps and she had served in the 688. And that was the first time I heard about the 688 or the Women's Army Corps. And so I just went down this rabbit hole, and then I thought, oh, this is where that woman goes. And her name was Judy back in 2011. And so I carried that over into writing this new book. I ordered a bunch of books, including One Woman's Army by Charity Adams, who is the highest ranking Black woman in the Army, who led the 688 battalion. And then I started writing basically what would become the Women of the Post back then. So that's how my interest started. And I think it's a wonderful coincidence. First of all, there are 20 million or so. This is a rough estimate. There are many, many books about World War II. Most of them feature white men. So I think it's fantastic that there are multiple iterations of the story of the 688. And I think we need more. In fact, I think there are more. There's a children's book coming out. I think Blair Underwood was producing a musical about the 688. So it's great that there's more than one version of the story. And I think that there should just be more of it because you know, there are all kinds of different ways that the inner lives and the intimate experiences of Black women who serve in the military are not covered at all in history. You know, we don't know what it's like. You know, we can talk about, okay, yes, they served and they were marginalized and all this, but like, where did they get their hair done? In Birmingham, England in 1944? Like, that's what I want to know, right? Like, and if they could, you know, so there's a scene in the book where they're actually building what they need, which is what Black women do, right? So like that, like we need no, you know, all due respect to Tyler Perry, he's not gonna write that scene, you know, because he doesn't really know that struggle, but I do, and like you know, and so we need these multiple versions of the story because they deserve that, just like all the 20 million other versions of World War II that don't center us deserve to be told.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. It just seemed like, and you know, it's things happen at the time they're supposed to.
Yes.
But it just seemed like all of a sudden we're hearing about this, which is great because it's all of a sudden we're hearing about a lot of things that we didn't hear about before. And
that's true
because more people are writing and more people are getting published by major publishers, but more people are also self-publishing really good work. Mm-hmm. So it's we have an abundance of riches in many ways, which is really great. So, and it's interesting to hear how
coming out. It's also good that it's coming out at a time where historical fiction has basically had a boom.
Right.
So it's, the audience is a lot more receptive to this story.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true. And I mean, I think, you know, from my perspective, you know, I grew up in the Bronx in the 80s and 90s. And so there's a piece in my book about the Bronx slave market. So basically the main character, Judy Washington, goes from the Bronx slave market to the Women's Army Corps. But the reason I brought up the Bronx slave market, which was uncovered originally by Ella Baker and a Black woman journalist named Marvell Cook, who went undercover on the Bronx slave market, which was basically an open air domestic worker situation that was in different parts of the Bronx where white women would basically go to pick up Black women and get them to do basically the hardest manual labor that they could imagine, cleaning windows and washing laundry by hand in cold water and all this. And they would pay them, you know, basically pennies an hour to do this manual grueling labor. And part of it was because the Secretary of State at the time, Henry Stimson, had basically outlawed European immigrants, right, who were the preferred domestic workers of the white middle class, from coming over during World War II. So that meant that there was this dearth of domestic workers. And so, of course, they looked to poor Black women who they thought, PS, were too dirty to live in their houses, but they didn't think they were too dirty to clean their houses for pennies. And so Marvel Cook and Ella Baker were the ones who basically elevated in the crisis, and later I think the Amsterdam News, the story of the Bronx slave market, which was important for me to tell because, you know, there's this idea and this narrative in this country that there was no slavery in the North, that the South is to blame all racism,
for everything, for all the
everywhere.
racism, right?
Right, but it's like, well, we know that New York is one of the most segregated places in the country, and you know, the Bronx is the epicenter of poverty, still, even as it gentrifies. And so I felt like it was important to also point out that for so many of us, we have no employment opportunities. We have no job mobility. That was true in the 40s. It's true today. And so the wealth gap in this country, you can stem back to World War II in part because even after the war and after these women served, many of them didn't get GI Bill benefits. They were part of millions of Black veterans, men and women, who just didn't get what they deserved. And so that's also an important piece, I think, to lift up.
Okay. Yeah, it was interesting to see how you came
up.
across the what motivated you, this 106-year-old woman that you read about. So,
Well,
you know,
yeah, she had changed her name. She decided when she was young that she was gonna spell Alice with a Y.
I
And
thought I had caught on to you saying that she had changed her name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she changed her name. And so, you know, there's a character in the book named Mary Alice, who is basically my imagined version of a recruit that Charity Adams writes about, who grew up in Vermont and spent her whole life around white people and thought she was white until she went to the Army Corps, and then she realized that her birth certificate said that her father was Black. And so I thought it was important to name Mary Alice after Alice Dixon, one, in tribute to Alice Dixon, who was the main inspiration for the story, but also because of her trajectory, you know, where she goes from basically changing everything in her life changes as soon as she goes to the Army, including her identity. And what an incredible journey to have to go on when you think that you're one thing, especially if you're a white woman, and then it turns out that you have to serve with Black women in the Army.
Yeah.
Well,
For those who may not,
go ahead, Dwayne.
well, I was going to ask her to do an encapsulation for those who may not know what
okay, about the book,
the 688 battalion, that part.
yeah, the 688. Okay,
Right.
so the 688 was the only self-contained unit of Black women and I think Black people to serve in World War II. At the time, Black people were not allowed to serve overseas, and so it was basically necessity, and the fact that so many people had died that they sort of ran out of people, so they were like, we need a support unit. The prisoners of war were gone, like everything was like just completely a wreck, which is usually what it is when they call us to help out. And so that was the situation in 1944. Mary McLeod Bethune, along with the Black press, were instrumental in helping to get the battalion to Birmingham, England, which is where they first went. They sailed on a ship called the Ile-de-France, which I think Eartha Kitt was maybe the only other Black person who had ever sailed on that ship, but they changed it into a military ship. And the women went overseas under Charity Adams' command. And they had 6 months, I think, to clear this backlog of millions of pieces of mail. Their motto was no mail, no morale, because essentially the troops who were still serving and marching on Normandy and dealing with the Battle of the Bulge and all over Europe and later into Asia, parts of the Philippines. Like all of those people thought that the war was going to be over in 1944. But Hitler and others had other plans. And so they continued to try and keep morale up. And because the soldiers in the trenches were cut off from mail, they had no news about what was going back home, and it's put them psychologically in danger. And so the work that these women did to clear this backlog and to connect these soldiers with their loved ones was critical to winning the war effort, because it meant that people who hadn't had any connection at all to the world, possibly for years, now suddenly could hear from people that they loved, and to be inspired to get themselves back home.
Beautiful.
Rhonda, I
Beautiful
will
summation.
pivot to you for the last couple of questions.
Well, my question, even with all of the everything that you learned about the history of the 6888, why did you choose to do a historical fiction novel instead of a nonfiction?
Yeah, I love that question because I was a journalist and I do love history and I love the facts of history, and I think that could have been fascinating. I think one, in terms of time and just the practical nature of trying to track down surviving members of the 6888, which I would want to do if I were going to do nonfiction. And then also just the gaps, I think, in the archive about what I was mentioning earlier in terms of their inner lives, in terms of the sisterhood, in terms of their relationships to each other, but also their relationships with other people overseas. It felt to me, writers often talk about how fiction can be more real than real life. And for me, the most important part of the 6888 and their journey, and specifically the main characters in the book, is their inner lives, is the fact that they defied all of these expectations of their time. Women weren't supposed to work, and they were mistreated and maligned in the press for trying to be men, distracting the soldiers over there with their womanly ways and all this other nonsense. And so it felt important for me to not root a narrative in the adversities that they faced, but rather the fact that they found sisterhood and they managed to persevere, and not only persevere, but to be true patriots in their service to this country, and to illuminate that through their sisterhood, as opposed to sort of relying on actual documents and records. I felt like I had to imagine a lot of how they would kiki and hang out and maybe drink a little moonshine and all that.
You give her a little human element.
That's not in the archive, but we know that probably happened. That's probably
Yeah, sometimes history has a habit of making it seem like everything that we did was kind of almost robotic. Like, for instance, when we think of Martin Luther King Jr., for example, we think that he was always preaching, he was always marching. We don't think about that he was probably tired. That we don't think about the times he said, "That mother effer has one more time." We don't think about him saying all of those things.
Yeah, it's dehumanizing. It's another way. It's a very subtle and nuanced way of dehumanizing us, to make us symbols that do not have the full range of human expression. And that's what I wanted for my characters. And I had to imagine it because, as you mentioned, if you look at any of our historical figures, there's nothing about when they were raggedy and when they were petty. And sometimes they were raggedy and sometimes they were petty. And they are allowed that. You know what I mean? And yes, I feel like what our ancestors want for us, to know that you can be brilliant and trailblazing and pioneering and also have these human aspects to you, because that's what it is to be human.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. But to be a multidimensional person, like all people, and not just one dimensional,
Right, and it shouldn't be a luxury. And also I think that that does real damage to us actually in terms of representation because we don't let young people know and the generations coming after us know like you can be imperfect. Like that's actually what it is. Like that's real, you know? And so this pressure to perform and have a persona and to seem perfect is, you know, I think it can be actually pretty debilitating, you know, because then how do you grow as a person and how do you know when you're really petty? You know, like you wouldn't know that, you know, because you've never seen it. You don't know what it looks like in action. But it's like, listen, I have some aunties and show you how to do it. You know, if you don't, you
Absolutely,
forgot,
absolutely. Now,
you
your book,
know.
you published your book in July of 2023. So you just experienced your first Black History Month with this book. How has the reception been?
It's really been really wonderful. It's, you know, I haven't, this is actually this is my first interview. Well, this is my second conversation about the book during Black History Month. And I'll have a couple more conversations throughout the rest of the year, which actually is a great relief, honestly, because it is American history. It is Black history for sure, 100%, but it's also women's history. It's also about Juneteenth. It's also about, you know, like it is also about Veterans Day, you know, like it, my aspiration for us and our Black history stories, especially in this short month, even though it's a leap year, yay.
We get an
You
extra
know,
day.
yeah, we get one extra day. It's still 1 day short, 2 days short, but it's all good. But like what I love though is pulling the story from the margins and pulling our stories of all kinds from the margins and bringing them to the center, you know, and like don't like yes, Black history 100%. I'm all about that, of course. But I also love that I'll just continue talking about them all year long and
Absolutely,
finding people
absolutely. I
that
mean,
Well,
you
they
have
Black
this
Black
history is
History Month,
American history for sure.
yes.
100%,
Mhm.
But it's
100%.
but
And
as you
so
said, it's
it's
also
been really
Women's
wonderful.
History. In August, you have Women's Equality Day. There are so many opportunities for this book. And let's not even talk about Veterans Day.
Yes,
Let's talk about
yes,
Memorial Day.
Memorial Day. Mhm.
yes, yes. No, but it's been wonderful. I actually heard from some relatives of Alice Dixon who said that they think that she would have been pleased at the representation of her in the book
That's a high
and
honor.
and what high praise, you know, like that is why I do what I do, you know, is to actually hope that I could even slightly get in the arena of what people actually experienced and what Black women actually experienced in the 40s, because this is before desegregation, you know, this is before the
Right.
army, the military was truly
Mhm.
desegregated. And
Mhm.
so, you know, to think that I had any part in elevating those experiences is actually just is such an honor.
Wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the interview, but that was a great way to end it. Those were great final words. If you can remind us, show us the book one more time and where we can find it.
Yes, this is Women of the Post. It is available on Amazon, bookshop, everywhere that books are sold. And I would love it if you would pick up a copy.
Well, I certainly will.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And happy Black
Okay.
History.
And the same
Okay.
to
Same
you.
to you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.